Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Making Milestones podcast. Long time no podcast. Life has gotten busy, and then I just kind of dip out for a little while, and then I come back. So thank you, everyone, for your patience. I always really appreciate the support of this podcast and just like how many people seem to like the episodes, no matter how unconventional it is, because I see it's been a month since I posted one. Oopsie doopsie. I was trying to do one once a week. As you can see, that has clearly not happened. So anyways, today's podcast episode is going to be a little bit of everything. It's going to be a life update. It's going to be talking about some of the transitional stages of horsemanship and like realism when you're transitioning from training super traditionally to getting more involved in rewards-based methods and just more science-based horse training and like what that's like, because I've talked about that a little bit before in episodes on ego death and whatnot that you can look into if you go back a few episodes and just go through the podcast library. So I'll go more in depth on that specific topic in those ones. But I wanted to talk about just like the realism when it comes to like actually having to like reform the way you've always been trained to do things and how much effort that actually is, because it's not easy. And like, just like with animals, when you're breaking habits within yourself, it's not something you can just decide that you want to change one day and then change it mistake free and just be perfect and never look back. That's not realistic. So I wanted to talk about that. And then I also wanted to talk about how unrealistic a lot of human expectations are of horses and just like our general view of them as a society and in this industry, and why it's so problematic, because there's just some really odd perspectives that persist. And I think that those really rigid perspectives of how we view horses and how we think they should behave and like what we expect of them oftentimes are what's behind a lot of the most mistreatment towards horses. So if we start to shift those perspectives, I do think that the treatment of horses would get better. And it's just about shifting your thinking and shifting the way you see things and shifting your expectations from how we look at them as a species, from doing it from a human-centric perspective of what humans think horses should do and like how they should do it and how quickly they should do it and like what is good behavior and bad behavior, and instead looking at it through the lens of what is normal horse behavior without humans in the equation at all. Is this horse responding to a situation as a horse normally would? And then if the answer is yes, it doesn't really matter what the human perspective of that is, because it's our job to work within the framework of what is normal horse behavior and help them adjust and live their lives accordingly. So anyways, it's going to be a little bit of a mishmash. As always, like I do these podcasts unscripted. So like no promises. If I go off on a tangent and we don't touch on one of those topics as much, sorry, that's just the way it goes. I just wanted to get something up, but I'm sure it'll be a good discussion that'll resonate with people, especially if you're in a transitional stage of your life or you have been in the past, or you might be entering one, and so on and so forth. So we'll jump into it in a second. I just wanted to do a little bit of shameless self-promoting, as I usually need to do. I don't usually put any ads on these podcasts, so all of the time that I put into the podcast and all the money I put into podcasting equipment comes from out of pocket. So your girl has got to advertise something to make a living. So anyways, I have an online store where I sell horse bridles, bitless and bitted bridles, and I even have a multi-bridle that you can use bitless and bitted. So it's really great for horses who are transitioning to bitless from bitted or vice versa. And it can give the rider a lot of peace of mind if they're a little bit nervous with that transition. And then I also have anatomical bridles for bitless riders as well as bitted. And I also have Western and English versions of both. So you can check those out at my store, Shop Milestone Eq. That's shopmilestoneeq.com. And I also have rider apparel. I have tons of the 2023 apparel on clearance sale for super, super cheap prices. And then I've also just released some really nice thin summer base layers called the Summer Solstice base layers in some really cute colors. And those are now available for purchase too. All of those base layers are made from recycled fabrics, so you can feel good about them being environmentally friendly. And we also offset our carbon emissions from shipping the products. So if you want to check all that out, you can check that out at the link in the description of this podcast or at shopmilestoneeq.com. And there's some really good products there. All of the sales from that store just help me continue doing what I'm doing. It's like what's helping me afford to care for my horses, pay off student debt, and gradually, hopefully, slowly build towards my lifetime goal of building a farm. of my own. Well, like buying one first, I guess, because I can't just build one on a property that's not mine. And then I also have a Patreon channel where you can get behind the scenes content, access to monthly Q&As, tons of training tutorials in the library. And it's a monthly subscription service where you can get access to those things, or you can subscribe for as little as $1 a month and you just get the Q&As and the behind the scenes content without the tutorials. And all of those subscriptions just help me continue doing what I'm doing, and they help with the content production, and you get to see more than what I post publicly. So you can subscribe to that at patreon.com/SDEQUUS, and all of your support with that is immensely appreciated. I also have my main website where I have a blog. I have free resources on there, and then I also have paid resources that are webinars. I also offer online consults for anyone who wants like a one-on-one consult to talk about specific problems with their horses. And you can check all of that out at milestoneequestrian.ca. I'll leave all of the links for that down below in the description. I also have a tip jar for anyone who would be interested in doing like a one-time payment just as like a help if you don't want to do a subscription service or any of that stuff. And I'll also leave that down below. So anyways, thank you everyone for all of your support. It means the world to me. It's what allows me to do what I love to do. And it's all just really important. Also, for those of you who don't know, I'm also on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok, and I'll leave all the links to those socials on my other account. I'm trying to get my YouTube up and running with more content now, so I'll be posting there more regularly. My views really took a hit after I got hacked a couple of years ago, so I'm slowly trying to rebuild from that, and it's super hit or miss. So any subscriptions, comments, likes, sharing of those videos really, really helps, and I really appreciate it, because sometimes it feels like I'm posting for no one, because people who follow me don't even get notified when I post. So it's a little bit frustrating. But anyways, let's just jump right into this discussion of first the life update. So life has been busy, like heading into summer, like as soon as the weather gets better, I get busy in a lot of different areas. One, because I tend to suffer from seasonal depression. So when the days are really short, long, and cold and the weather is bad, really all of my energy goes into doing like the needs, which are like the basic day-to-day care of the horses and just like business stuff that I have to do. But like it's really hard to motivate myself to want to do stuff because it's just like a depressing time of year for me. So as soon as the days start getting longer and the weather starts getting nicer, I start doing more stuff like going for hikes, going camping, doing more stuff with my horses, hauling them out for trail rides, riding them more, and just being out and about more, in addition to all of the other work stuff I do. So like the training client horses, doing the online consults, doing all the website upkeep for my store and my main website, content creation for all of my pages, packing and shipping products for the businesses, and so on and so forth. So it gets really busy. And I have a lot of different hats that I'm wearing because I'm managing all aspects of my business right now. And I'm at a point where I've been saying this for a while, but I really do need to hire help. But it's just a little bit daunting for me because in order to get the type of help that would be the most beneficial for me, I have to give people access to like personal stuff, like my email account and stuff, and just like trust them to actually do the work. And that's something that I'm struggling with. So I've been putting it off. So anyways, it's all just me doing it. Busy, busy girl. And I also have ADHD on top of this. So like organization is not my strong suit. So the more activities I add, the more flustered I feel. So even though this is like one of my favorite times of year, I find myself just feeling flustered and like running around with a chicken with my head cut off. So anyways, I've been enjoying my horses more. I've been able to do more stuff with them. I've been spending a lot of time, like especially around like sunset, golden hour, just hanging out in the field with them and watching them. And it's super peaceful and beautiful. And it's been helping me slow my brain down because I am typically a chronic overthinker, and it can be a huge source of stress where it's like really difficult for me to let down and relax because I'm constantly looking for things to like further my business and continue pushing towards like my long-term goals, like with what I mentioned with the farm and stuff. And it can be really unhealthy because then even in my downtime, I'll just be like, my mind is on this constant cycle where I'm like really quite stressed about trying to get stuff done to get to my end goal destination as soon as possible. So just hanging out with the horses and doing stuff like that has been really grounding for me. And I've been trying to do more of that and just like slowing stuff right down. And that kind of plays into as well, like with like how I've kind of shifted the way that I approach horsemanship, because when I was working with my horses in years past, like this is not super, super recent years because this shift has been occurring over the course of like the last like decade, but more so from like my early 20s to now where I'm 28, like in my late 20s. I've been shifting from being really prioritizing riding and getting ahead in goals related to riding and competition. and feeling like I needed to ride my horses a certain number of times a week to see progress, and just like really having that be all about the time that I spent with them was always riding related. So I've been shifting away from that and moving more towards enjoying just spending any time with them and having that time be like low pressure time where I don't need to be demanding stuff of them and where I don't need to be demanding stuff from myself. And that's really helped me regain a level of passion and enjoyment for horses in like a really peaceful atmosphere, low pressure atmosphere that I lacked for a very long time, just because there is such a focus on pushing ahead in riding related goals. So that's been really healthy for me, and it's helped me slow down, and it's been good for my ADHD and stuff as well. So that's what I've been doing a lot of, and I've been going for some trail rides and stuff too. And I've been saying this for years as well, but I really do want to take my horses camping. So I'm hoping that this is the year that I'll get my shit together and I'll actually go out and do that, because I think it would be fun. So I'm hoping to do that going into the summer, but it is a busy time of year. So it's kind of one of those things where it's like, I'm going to probably get out there, hopefully, to do it once, may or may not. If I don't, then maybe I'll go in the fall. I'm trying to just do stuff though, because it's like life is short. You don't know when circumstances are going to change. And I've been trying to just like motivate myself to do stuff that I really want to do and not put it off so much, because I always end up regretting it if I put it off. So that's kind of the plan for the summer. I recently moved Harlow back home. Harlow is my off-the-track thoroughbred mare. I had her at a client's place and I was schooling her in their arena, and she's been there since like March or so. So I moved her back home for the summer so that we can trail ride a little bit more and just have more horses to take out if like friends and stuff want to come. And I think Harlow is probably going to be my mom's trail horse for the summer. She's either going to ride her or Milo, probably, because like my main riding horses that I have right now are Harlow, Milo, and Banksy. Juniper, I've been in the process of starting under saddle just by like sitting on her and stuff, but honestly it's taken like a bit of a backseat and it's not a huge priority. And even if I put her on more of a priority, it's not going to be something where she's going to be like trail riding this summer. I don't think that's realistic, especially with like hauling her around to do that. So those are like my three main riding horses, and people are probably like, oh, well, what about Pogo? Well, Pogo has been having some difficulties because last year he injured his cornet band. Like, I think how he did it is he got his foot underneath their hoof hut somehow. So it wasn't like a super bad injury. He didn't need stitches, but he tore off a bunch of the skin right on his cornet band. So then when the hoof from that injured area grew down, it created like this dent that almost looks like a burst abscess area where there's like a bit of like a hole in his foot. And then when that grew down all the way to the toe, it split and started to like crack up the hoof. So then we had to cut that out and trim him shorter than what would be comfortable for him. So then he was footsore, and it's growing out now. He's still a little bit footsore, but like he's not going for rides. It wouldn't be fair to him. And then more recently, unfortunately, I posted about this to subscribers on Instagram and then also Patreon subscribers as well. But more recently, like we had the vet out to just do some basic imaging and stuff, because like I've always felt that Pogo probably has kissing spine because he has this roach in his back where there's like back tension, and then he's been intermittently back sore, and he fits like the type for kissing spine or wobblers to a T. And since his brother George, who is one of my horses, if you're new here, you might not know him, but he passed away from neurological issues. Since Pogo is his half sibling, I just wanted to like make sure that there wasn't any neurological issues or anything going on, because I was noticing Pogo tripping a little bit, and he hasn't been in work, right? So it's not been a big deal so long as he's like safe to get around the field. But I just wanted to know so that like we know for my mom and we can make adjustments and accommodations for him. And anyways, unfortunately, he does have kissing spine, which is like I was expecting it. My mom's obviously disappointed, but going into the vet appointment, I told her, I was like, I would be like astounded if he doesn't, honestly. And like a lot of horses do. The vet was saying that only about 50% of kissing spine horses are symptomatic. So basically what we're doing with him now is we're going to wait for his hoof to finish growing out and healing. And then we're going to reassess with like some body work and whatnot, and just see like how much of like any back tightness and soreness is related to him compensating for that sore foot versus the kissing spine, and then go from there. Worst case scenario, he's just going to be like a field pet and living his life as a field horse because he's very comfortable and happy doing that. Best case scenario, it would be nice if my mom could take him on little hacks like at the walk and trot, or if he could like come along and just do like little rides for kids and whatnot. He's never going to jump. That was never really the plan for him because his conformation is not great, and my mom doesn't care about that. So there's literally no point in asking him to do really demanding stuff. So right now it's kind of like, you know, like no matter what, like even if we could get him super comfortable where in theory he could do like showing and like stuff like that where he's like jumping around and stuff, it's just not something we're gonna do because it would just make no sense. And he's one of those horses where like even if he's in pain, he would do what you asked him to do and he would just go through the motions of it. So he's a very easy horse to take advantage of, and it just wouldn't be fair to him. So we're kind of just going to see how it goes because we do have like a lot of different options for like what we could do for treatment, like shockwave, mesotherapy, body work. He could go on something like Previcox as like a long-term painkiller. I'm less comfortable with that because I want to do something that's actually going to help him biomechanically function better in a way that's not just like masking the pain. But we're going to kind of play it by ear and do that according to like how he continues to move along with this hoof issue. So he's kind of out of commission for the entire summer, I would predict, other than some very basic little things. Maybe like we're going to start doing like a groundwork rehab and like stretching rehab and just building more top line muscle, which he has a way nicer top line now than he did before because he lost a lot of top line muscle like last winter, like not winter 2023, like winter 2022. And that's kind of when I started to really be like, okay, we should look into the kissing spine stuff. So he's done very, very little, like the last year and a half to 2 years. So anyways, we're going to just kind of see how that goes. My mom loves him, so he's never leaving the herd because he's like everyone's friend. And I also would never offload a horse that has like significant health issues or issues that make them like less desirable to people because like people want a horse that they can ride around on. And kind of the camp that I'm in is like if we as a family did not care enough about him to keep him, whether or not he can be ridden or if he can only be lightly ridden, why would someone who's never met him want to do that for us, especially long term? Like he's only 7 years old. So obviously he's staying with us. That's like no problem. And it's just going to be one of those things where like whatever he needs, that's going to be the life that he is going to live. If at any point he becomes so uncomfortable that he cannot be comfy in the field, then we'd handle it at that point. But we're a long, long, long ways off of that because he's quite happy playing with his friends and just enjoying himself out in the field. But it is disappointing. And it's just kind of one of those things where like I do think there's a genetic component. He's a very poorly conformed horse. He honestly should have never been bred. The stallion that he is by, Texas Wildcatter, is really fugly and he should not be reproducing. But the racing industry in particular is very about like bloodlines and bloodlines that tend to throw good racehorses in. Like Wildcatter, as I'm sure people who know racehorses will probably be guessing, is like a Stormcat bloodline. So I hope he's breeding less now because I don't know if he really had any successful children or all that successful children. But anyways, he's not an attractive horse. Pogo's dam is much more correct. So unfortunately, a lot of the problems that he's gotten probably come from his father. The other thing too is that the Stormcat bloodline, there has been some research that has thought that there's a genetic component linking kissing spine, which might explain why Stormcat was known to have such a bad temperament. Like maybe he was in pain, probably was in pain. So there's a bunch of different things. I think it's the genetic component and the bad conformation, along with the fact that like I knew him when he was at the track. I never galloped him, but he had to be sent home from the racetrack twice during his 2-year-old year because he was getting bucked shins. So his shins were quite sore and swollen. And that was twice where he had to get spelled off. And he has a tendency to kind of go around really high-headed and hollow, and especially when he's stressed, and he was stressed at the track and he was just very, very immature looking. Like obviously a 2-year-old is immature, but like compared to like other thoroughbred 2-year-olds, he was like exceptionally immature. So he didn't really have the muscle and body mass to make it easier to carry around a rider. And like the people who were starting him weren't necessarily the most considerate about it. Can't attest to how true this is, but I was told that one of the jockeys who started him under saddle when they were ground driving him actually managed to like flip him over while they were ground driving. And like I've never known Pogo to be a horse that rears in any context outside of playing with Banksy. So I found that really interesting because he, even as a 2-year-old, he was a really calm horse. So it made me wonder like if that's true, what in the world would they have had to have done to make that happen? So anyways, that's the most big update that I have in terms of like big changes, I guess, but also not really because it's not really going to adjust what he's been doing the last like year. So that's been what's been going on. And then with me, I've just been working really hard to continue promoting my business and trying to get the advancements that I need to, one, keep up with the inflation rates of the world, and two, hopefully one day become a homeowner in this economy where most people who are buying homes are doing so with generational wealth and help from parents. I don't have any of that in access to me. So like, that's why I'm just like constantly trying to look for new revenue streams and just like different ways of doing things just to continue doing this, because I'm kind of like in the camp where it's like, you know, on the airplanes, how they're like, put your oxygen mask on first before you help others. I want to get to the point where I'm financially stable enough where I could call it like my oxygen mask is on, because then once I'm there, I can help people way more than what I'm currently capable of. And I can really start to make a big difference in a way that I feel like I haven't been able to yet, because money talks and it does afford opportunities and it does help bail people out of bad situations. So that's what I'm really gunning for as well. And then I've been trying to put more time doing stuff for myself. So I've been doing stuff like kickboxing and like going for hikes, hanging out with friends more, like having barbecues and just trying to be more social, because for a while, like when I was initially just like establishing myself as a trainer and like my business, I really isolated myself and I really didn't see very many friends at all. And I was mostly just working, and it was like a really depressing, not fun time to be in. So I'm trying to make changes to that. And yeah, a quick little update that I'll give is that I have indeed met person romantically. Not going to go into much more detail than that at this time, because I've made mistakes in the past where I talk about them too much online first, and then they end up being like a terrible person who's just been gaslighting and lying to me like the whole time. And I don't want that to happen again, because that would be it was pretty embarrassing like the last two times. It would be really embarrassing if it happened a third time. So at some point you'll hear more about that, not right now, because I just want to continue just seeing how things go. But that's a little update. But anyways, that's my life update recap, I suppose. And then let's just jump into what I was talking about, like expectations with horses and like also like transitional stuff with people and whatnot. I guess it would make more sense to kind of make this a segue into talking about like transitional stuff with people, because I would say that like I'm going through a pretty transitional time of my life, like especially these last several years. Like I'd say the biggest changes in my life were probably between like, I don't know, like age 22 to like 26. And then now 27, 28, it's kind of, I'm still going through a transitional stage, but it's less like of a whirlwind and it's less hectic and it's becoming more peaceful and less stressful and confusing. Because for a lot of years, I think I really didn't know who I was or what I wanted to do or what really made me happy. And I was kind of operating on the basis of what I thought I was supposed to want as a horse person and like what I thought was going to work as like a business person or whatever. And also like in a place where like I had a lot of imposter syndrome, where I was like really insecure about stuff. And like I still do have imposter syndrome, but I've kind of hit this sweet spot where like I look around at these people in the world who manage to get in really high profile positions when they are like completely unqualified. Like I use Donald Trump as an inspiration, not for being a terrible person like he is, but for the fact that like he is woefully unqualified to be like a world leader, and he's also does not seem to be a very intelligent person, and he just says a lot of ignorant shit, but he believes in himself so much that it ended up working out. And if people who are that unqualified can believe that they are qualified, then with the work that I've put in to learn the stuff that I have and to do the stuff that I have, I think that I can fake it until I make it and be faking it less than a lot of people out there. Even amongst horse trainers, like I see how a lot of mainstream trainers are advertising themselves and capitalizing off of social media, which from a business perspective is very, very smart. But the way in which they do it feels predatory to me, and it feels really unrealistic, where they're making promises to like have these immediate fixes within the span of like 2 weeks or 30 days of online schooling, when the horses could have like physical health issues or environmental stressors that are contributing to their unwanted behavior. And I feel like it's preying on vulnerable horse owners and offering them fixes that aren't actually addressing the actual problem. So I've not been able to buy into doing that sort of thing because it makes me feel very uncomfortable. And it's something that I have accepted now. Like, I'd say the hard part with that is that I know that if I was willing to do that, I would undoubtedly make more money than I am currently. But then I'd have to sell out on some of my morals and ethics in order to do so. So I've kind of hit the point where it's like I've had to decide what's more important. Do I want to get to my end goals and like have the money to do these lifelong dreams faster, but lose parts of who I am in the process and sell out who I am in the process and do things that don't feel good and that will damage my mental health in the long run? Or do I want to go slower and continue doing stuff in a way that I feel is ethically sound and that I feel more comfortable with and not have as instant gratification? And I've chosen to sway away from the instant gratification and prioritize just doing what feels comfortable and right to me and what I think will be of the greatest help to people. But it has meant that I do know like my type of training is not everyone's cup of tea. It's not going to be everyone's preference because it's slow, it's boring, it's not as exciting, it's not promising them instant fixes, and it requires more work on the end of the rider slash horse owner to really make big shifts in their horse's lifestyle. And until they actually start to commit to it, they're probably not going to see those big shifts under my guidance. And for people who haven't really delved into that to the extent to actually see like the results that come out of it, it's a hard process to commit to when it means having to let go of like instant gratification, like for example being able to show your horse and ride them every day when they're very stressed or they're in pain. When you have to let go of that and kind of take a step back and do things a lot slower, it is hard to do and it's really unpleasant. And like I speak as someone who resisted doing that exact thing for like a number of years. But I've realized now that I'm like more on the other side, that like the time that I tried to save, like chasing goals and trying to fast track things and trying to ignore the elephant in the room and just like keep pushing on, the time that I saved initially where I would be able to kind of get instant gratification, it was less satisfying overall. The results weren't as good. And then it ended up creating more work for me to undo problems in the long run. So now I'm a lot more comfortable with waiting for the outcome and just committing to the process and trusting that results will come. But in the beginning, that was very hard to do, especially when you don't know. Like when I was going through all of these problems with Milo's hooves and his behavioral problems and just how cranky and like upset he was and how much he hated riding and how much he chose to opt out of work when I gave him more choice, I didn't know what the outcome was going to be. And it was really tempting to revert back to like a comfort zone where I know that I could have like forced him to do stuff and just continued on the path that we were on before. And it was tempting. And during that process, especially in the early stages of it, like I did revert back to those quicker fixes initially. So it was like kind of ping ponging back and forth in a way where you'd go back to what was comfortable and what you'd done for a while, but then go back to the new way of doing things because you felt better about it, even though there's like that portion of time where you do feel really down about the lack of progress you're making and you're not sure if you're on the right track. But when you're trying to find the right pathway, you kind of have to explore a lot of different pathways and experiment until you figure out like what's working and what feels good. And part of that process is feeling lost for a certain amount of time. But when you feel lost, it's only natural to go back to familiar pathways, even if they're leading you in the wrong direction. So in the process of like reforming horsemanship and changing how you do things, one thing I don't think people talk about enough is that like, even as you start to commit to wanting to do things better and wanting to do them a different way and starting to acknowledge that the way that you were taught to do things initially isn't the most ethical or fair to the horse, there's going to be times where you get frustrated or where you're confused or where you're lost or where you don't know where to step next, that you then resort to what you used to do because it's a comfort zone. And this isn't to justify it because it still is, as however impactful it is to the horse's well-being, depending on what we're talking about, because there's so many different avenues to training the same types of behaviors. It doesn't change the impact to the horse, but it's also understandable because we're talking about changing people's behavior and changing habits that have been built over the course of years, and in some cases like decades and decades. So it takes time. And that part of the journey was really demoralizing, because then when I would resort to like lazy old methods that I used to do, I'd feel bad about it after, and then I'd beat myself up about it after. But I think an important takeaway with this journey, like when you're changing your training and you're going from traditional horse training methods to rewards-based methods, is that feeling bad about doing something that you used to do without feeling bad is still an improvement, because you're being more critical of yourself, you're holding yourself more accountable, and you're recognizing the wrong in it, which makes it easier to change. If you don't feel bad about it and you try to justify and like gaslight yourself into thinking it's fine, you're not at the same stage that you are when you're able to look at it and go, this doesn't feel good. This doesn't feel right. So it's still a sign that you're on the right track, even if you're kind of ping-ponging back and forth between old ways of doing things and new ones. And that's like part of the process of like having these transitional periods. And this goes like outside of the horse world too, right? Like when you're trying to work on like mental health or physical health, or like bad habits that you've drawn, or like toxic behaviors that you have, like there's always going to be times where you start to revert back to those behaviors, unless you're like a very, very skilled stoic person who is objectively perfect when you're altering bad habits. But like if you're able to do that without having any mistake, the habits themselves are probably not that bad. So there's always going to be that point in time where you struggle with the like grappling between doing the thing that you know is right or that you want to do, and doing the thing that feels easier. And it's part of the process of like altering those behaviors. So it's something to be mindful of. And it's not to say that you should always let yourself off the hook for when you resort to like lazy things that might cause harm to horses or other people. But being able to take note of when you're doing that and notice that you're feeling bad about it now is a sign that you're on some of the right track. Also, sorry, my allergies are really bad right now from the hay, so I probably sound like so congested throughout this, and it's getting worse as we go for some reason, but bear with me. So anyways, that transitional stage, like there's going to be back and forth, and like that's okay. It's not something to like feel like you're a failure for, because like everyone does it, but like we don't talk about it enough, and then it creates this shame in people when they feel like they're not doing it as perfectly as other people. But the truth is that no one's doing it perfectly. No one is perfect. Even the people who seem to have it most together, they're putting on a good face for like the public, and like they might have it way more together than you do. Maybe they are really organized, but guaranteed they do not have stuff together as much as what people see from the outside, because internally everyone has questions, everyone has uncertainties, and everyone has times where they really don't know what they want to do, or where they don't feel good about themselves. They just don't always share it. And like I had a lot of those times over the years where I was really unsure. And like even in recent times when there's stuff that I'm really unsure about and that I feel like not great about, during those times, I'm not necessarily going to candidly share that with my thousands of followers online, because people are mean, and it opens you up to a level of vulnerability that, if you're already struggling, can be really difficult to cope with. So it's easier to deal with the hardest part of those situations with people that you're closest to, and then once you're more or less through and on the other side, share it with people, and like within reason. Because when I've really been struggling, I have shared it before, but then there's been times where I've really regretted it. Like when George was sick, I shared some of the process of that, and like when we were treating him for EPM and stuff, but people were really judgmental and nasty, and I had people that blamed me for his death, and I regret doing that. I should have just kept it within my close crowd and shared less information to the public, or waited until we knew more before sharing it, because people will feel like that what you share of your life is the entirety of it, and then they feel entitled to judging it in its completion and making assumptions about what has been done and what hasn't. That could be really hurtful. So yeah, people aren't sharing the full story of what they're going through with you. And like, that's also something to take away, is that like anytime you feel like the urge to just be mean spirited to someone, maybe consider that. Like, no matter how much someone pisses you off and how awful they are, I would encourage people to try to stick to talking about behaviors that bother you about people rather than like slamming them as an entire person. And if it's just like an online entity that is just doing their own thing that you can easily ignore, rather than getting sucked into that cycle of just hating them and like hate following them and looking at their content and just like talking shit about them, try to just like disconnect. And people could try to be like, oh, you're a hypocrite for saying this because like I do talk about like horse welfare issues and stuff, but I try not to single out specific people on a repeated basis, with the exception of Clinton Anderson, because he's been doing the same thing for so long. And also, even with him, like my issue with him is not just with him. It's with anyone who handles horses in that manner where they're being rough. And my issue with him, if he were to ever change the way he goes about doing things and kind of turn over a new leaf, then I would no longer have an issue with him. But there's a line that gets crossed where it's just like something about someone just rubs you the wrong way, and then it's just like you look for things wrong with them, and it turns into this really toxic and negative cycle that is hard to break free from, and it'll also impact your own growth as a person in this transitional journey. And I say this as someone who used to do that in the past. Like when I was younger, it was something where I was like a lot more invested in drama, and it was a lot more petty. It was less about like actually discussing relevant welfare issues and more about like targeting people that just bothered me, that just rubbed me the wrong way. And it wasn't right. And it was like also so detrimental to me without and to the other people if I actually said stuff to them. But even if it's occurring just amongst group chats and stuff, like it's like, if that's where a lot of your energy is going, into negativity, there's no way around the fact that that's going to end up impacting your life in some capacity, where that negative energy is going to like rebound back into your life and impact you negatively. So that's kind of been a huge thing for me, where I've gotten to a point where there's been a lot of people in my life that I've known for a while that like I would have called friends, but they were only bringing negativity into my life. And despite how hard I tried to make it work and like invite them to things, like I never felt good after those interactions. So I've hit the point where it's like I've just started not having those types of people in my life anymore. And even if you still love them, like you can love people from afar while recognizing the fact that they don't need to be immediately present in your life right in this moment. So for close friends and like relationships like that, I've done that online. I've just started blocking people whose content really annoys me. I don't go scrolling through my TikTok feed because there's a lot of bad horsemanship on TikTok that upsets me and puts me in a bad mood. Commenters that are routinely just committed to just being really shitty to me and just talking shit about me all the time and saying really untrue, mean-spirited things, I've started muting them or blocking them way more readily. I used to give people way more chances and I'd have back and forth with them a lot more. Still do to an extent with certain conversations, if I could be sharing stuff where people could read through the conversation and maybe learn something from like a third person vantage point by reading both persons' side of the argument. But when it's just mean-spirited stuff and it's like the same person who's repeatedly coming back just to be nasty to me, where it's very clear that it's not just about what I do or what I say, it's about like who I am as a person. They just don't like me because the level of irritation that they direct at me is not something that is evenly distributed around anyone who is just like me. Like there's beef with me in specific. There's something about me that irks them. People like that, I don't need to give the time of day to. Like, I don't need to hear out their criticism. I don't need to give them a platform for it. If my content bothers them, they can have it bother them away from me. It's not my job to let them basically give their piece to me about why I should value their perspective on something, especially if it's a perspective that's purely anecdotal. They're not entitled to that. They're not entitled to my agreement. And people who feel the need to constantly plead their case with me on my posts and justify like their perspective when it differs from what I think is ethical, a lot of the people who do that, it's because my posts strike a chord in them and make them feel insecure. And then in order to try to combat that insecurity, they then lash out at me and try to make it so where I'm backed into a corner and I have to basically be like, you're right. But when I don't do that, they get exceedingly more frustrated, and then it kind of divulges into this thing where you have people who spend months, years, and honestly, in some people's cases, like over a decade, to just being hateful towards me. And it's just super, super unhealthy. So I've hit a point where I've stopped giving those people as much of a platform because it's not fun for anybody. It's just a toxic mindset. And like social media is toxic enough as it is. It's why I stopped using my public Twitter as well, because I found Twitter was one of the most toxic places to be on. It's why on TikTok, I don't go scrolling through the feeds, and why I do very limited posting on there where I kind of just post and dip out, and why I don't keep track of my notifications on there as much, because I find TikTok to be more toxic than Facebook or Instagram. So, or YouTube. So I've kind of made changes to try to facilitate my own internal health. Whether people understand it or not doesn't really matter. It's for me. And I've also just been working on myself to like recognize the fact that like a lot of people's issues that they have like with you are more about something that's like internally felt. So when people really don't like you, it's not always just about you. Sometimes it is. Sometimes you are being a piece of shit. That absolutely has been the case in the past with me for sure. And it probably will be the case again in the future. Like sometimes you are being an asshole, and like no one is perfect. We all have bad days. No matter how nice you try to be, there's going to be a day where you step on someone's toes. But a lot of times it's coming from like a personal insecurity that's then being projected onto you. And I've done this to other people, myself as well, where I've been insecure and I've projected that personal insecurity onto them and tried to make it their job to make me feel better. And then when they can't do that, I just get mad at them and it's like lashing out at them. I find a lot of people do that to me because I've noticed there's this trend online where people will be like, oh, Shelby doesn't know what she's talking about. She's like glorified, like pedo warrior. She's like a narcissist, egotistical who just does this all for attention. And they're just like writing their own fan fiction about who I am as a person and like what the motivations behind my behavior are when they do not know me. And when their perception of me is colored through their own lens of like whatever they're feeling in their life, their insecurities, however I made them feel, and they're remembering interactions from that to be were fleeting interactions, or where you're typing on something where there's like a character limit and it's going to come across differently in writing, and just writing my entire character based off of that, and it's just not true. So I've kind of hit the point for like my self-esteem where it's like only I know who I am, and like only those close to me get the closest glimpse of who I am as a person. Ultimately, like the same applies to anyone listening to this. Like ultimately only you get to define who you are as a person. Someone else doesn't get to say who you are, what your motivations are for things, or why you do things the way that you do, or why you care about things the way that you do. They don't know you. That's not their place. They can make assumptions, they can make guesses, they can try to infer why you might behave the way that you do, but that's all those things are. They're inferences. You don't know for sure anything about someone just from their online content. Because also for me, like if I was doing stuff just for attention, there's like way better things I could be doing. Like I'm doing a bad job at getting social media attention and trying to profit off of social media. If the sole goal is getting attention and like building a following, I'm doing a bad job of that because my content by default of like what topics I choose alienates other people and makes them less likely to want to listen to my stuff. And if I tried to stay more neutral and appeal to everyone and posted more exciting training videos rather than training that's like really low intensity and like quiet and boring to most, I would get more views because I've seen how that works. Like I got the most viral videos and the repeatedly like blown up content when Milo was at his most stressed because people found that the most interesting. So I'm doing a bad job of that. And like I get that the amount of passion that I have about certain topics and just like the intensity that I have about like how I talk about certain things might be off-putting to some people, but it's also like I am on the spectrum. This is one of my hyperfixations. Like horses have been a lifelong hyperfixation, and like as I have become an adult, that hyperfixation has slowly blossomed from being really specific to like riding and training horses and trying to come across as being like a good rider by like the amount of bullshit I could sit through in the saddle and like how difficult the horses I rode were and how I did at competitions. It's blossomed from that to a fascination about horses from a behavioral perspective, from a scientific perspective, from a physiological perspective, and trying to promote welfare because of that. And also like the reason why welfare has become such a special interest is that for years and years of my life, like I grew up feeling massively misunderstood. I felt like no one really truly saw me or understood how I felt. I always felt on the fringes of everything, and I never felt like I fully fit in, and I never felt fully seen or heard or validated. And it was a really uncomfortable and unpleasant place to be. And seeing what we do to horses on regular basis in the name of training and caring for them, and just like how much they lack autonomy and how scary things must be for them and how uncomfortable and unpleasant they must be. It's anything I have felt is just like a mere shred of what the average horse goes through. So thinking about how hard that was for me growing up as a child, feeling the way that I did, going through the trauma that I did, and feeling like unheard, unseen, and unsupported to the extent that I needed to, even though I did have support systems, comparing that to like how massively deprived of basic needs the average horse is, and how common it is for really harsh equipment to be used in the name of controlling horses, it really puts things into perspective, because I think about how I felt and how painful certain portions of my life have been, either emotionally or physically or both. And then I look at like the average horse living in a boarding facility where they're standing in a stall for like 18 to 24 hours a day, and they're pinning their ears and lunging at horses who walk past the stall. They're biting at people and being cranky, and like seeing all these videos of humans joking about these types of behaviors in horses. It's really lit a fire under me, because like there's these animals that are just miserable, and they're communicating how miserable they are, and it's getting laughed off, or it's getting labeled as bad behavior, or just them being a dick or being a bitch, and they're not being heard. And so when we see really aggressive horses, it's horses who would have started out being quieter in their behavior. They would have let people know with less intensity, but then when they're ignored time after time after time, and their level of discontent and unhappiness with life just builds and builds and builds, then they get louder and louder and louder. And like those horses who are really aggressive and loud, they haven't shut down yet. Whereas you have the ones who have shut down, who are basically just like a shell of a being, and it's really sad. So that's why this stuff is so important to me. That's why like I talk about these things, and it's become something where it's like I do dedicate a lot of time to that. And I'm a pretty intense person, and I understand that. But like if you talk to anyone who actually knows me in person, it's not just me being that intense about horse stuff. It's like all types of injustice. So like for people who aren't into that stuff, I'm probably such an annoying person. But that I'm not for them, because I find it really annoying to be around people who don't care about things and who just operate in life on a very superficial basis, where they don't even really get to know their friends, because they only want to do fun things with their friends. They only want to do lighthearted things with their friends. So if they have a friend who's experiencing trauma, they don't want to deal with the inconvenience and discomfort of having to listen to that and see that person through their trauma. And I find those people really toxic and annoying to be around too. So like they don't mesh with me, I don't mesh with them. That's fine. And anyways, that's the path that I'm on now. And this is kind of a good segue into going into the unrealistic expectations people have for horses, because it feeds into what I'm saying about the average horse and the lifestyle that they live, and just like how unfulfilled and unhappy they are. Like there's all these things that we just expect horses to be able to do simply because it's something that humans have expected of them for decades or centuries, that are just very, very unnatural for horses. Like the most common of which might be asking horses to live in stalls and just expecting them to deal with it. And then people get frustrated when their horses start kicking the walls or chewing on the wood, or being really difficult to ride under saddle because they don't have enough exercise outside of riding. And people get frustrated with them, and they take out that frustration on the horses, and they want the problem behaviors that are resulting from the care to go away, but they don't want to deal with what's causing those actual behaviors. And it's just a very unrealistic thing, where essentially you're expecting to be able to control a living being to the extent where you can deprive them of basic needs and not have any unwanted behaviors develop, or where you can ask them to do things that are like super abnormal for them to do as a species. So for like being in a tiny confined little box away from other horses, not a normal thing for a flight animal who is meant to exist in a social herd setting. That's not a normal thing for them to do. Or when you're asking them to like load in a horse trailer, for a flight animal who is afraid of new things, who is afraid of being confined, who's afraid of being taken away from their friends and their homeland, to load into a dark, loud, rattly box that will always take them somewhere new and scary. not a normal thing. And yet people expect it to the point where they feel entitled to really aggressively getting after horses and getting mad at them when they won't load, when at its core, we are asking these animals to do such an abnormal behavior that it's our job to make it seem like a good idea to them. And the fact that so much of the ways in which we teach horses how to cope with these things is rooted in forcing them to do it by scaring them to the point where they just feel like there's no other option. So it's like the equivalent between putting them between a rock and a hard place, or just like leaving them to stress and wash themselves out, like pacing around in a stall and screaming until they finally give up and go into learned helplessness when they realize their situation can't change, and the stress being as high as that is and being like outwardly reacting to it is so painful and expensive that their body has to protect them by shutting down. And it's just really sad. Like, we have all of these things that we just expect horses to do and that we get annoyed when they don't do or when they can't do it easily. And we just feel entitled to it. Like, even tying horses, for example. The amount of horrendous videos out there of people hard tying horses and watching them fight back and freak out until they shut down or seriously injure themselves is absurd. Tying is another way of confining and trapping a flight animal, and it's an unnatural behavior. All of these things that we teach horses are unnatural behaviors that yes, they like tying for safety things does need to be done. Teaching horses how to stand for the vet and have their feet trimmed and stuff, yes, that needs to be done for their health. But that doesn't mean that we have a free pass to be really cruel and demanding and impatient in how we go about doing that. We should have a higher degree of patience for these animals based off of how we know they naturally function as a flight species, and be aware of how abnormal so much of what we ask them to do is, and then be more compassionate because of that. But unfortunately, so few people are actually taught the reality behind how abnormal these types of living situations and training situations are for horses, because it feels normal because of how common you see them in the industry and like how we're initially brought up and taught to do things in the horse world. It all feels normal. So people are like completely oblivious of like how unfair their actual demands of their horses are. And they don't get it. So it's really hard to try to have people who cannot see the light learn how to become compassionate, especially when they're met with information that just calls stuff out blankly. That's like, hey, this is not good for horses, or this is unkind to horses, because when they've been surrounded by that their whole life, they naturally get defensive. And this isn't to say I don't think we should expose that information, because I do. And I think discomfort is a huge part of growth, especially when it's the discomfort that is like letting go of like so many normalized belief systems that contribute to mistreatment of horses. It's really hard to do, but it's impossible to get through that process and out on the other side without being uncomfortable, because you need to be uncomfortable when you're in the process of realizing that things that you have justified for years are wrong. It is a normal response to be uncomfortable and have it be really upsetting, because it is. So it's a part of the process, but in the effort to evade that discomfort, a lot of people go into denial and they'll just double down. I'd say denial is like the first phase of like eventually hitting acceptance and learning and growing, because I went through a massive denial phase as well. I think it'd be really hard to accept the information right away and not go through that phase. I think that's the reason why a lot of new horse people and people outside of the horse world have so much of an easier time accepting modern science-based horse training and care information in comparison to lifelong horse people who've been in the industry for years, because they haven't had as many years of conditioning teaching them to believe something completely different. And having to look back at all those years that you've believed something different, that you've done things that you're now being told cause horses harm, and like have to look at it and actually take it in as fact is really, really hard to do, because you feel guilty and ashamed. And it also means that you have to completely relearn so much stuff, which is a huge undertaking. So it's very frustrating, but it's going to be necessary in terms of having us perceive horses in a more realistic light and just be kinder to them, because there's no way we can show up in the way that horses need us to and be the type of people that horses need us to be without being more empathetic and without like starting to understand them from a species specific level on a more fundamental basis. Because like as a species, even people who've been with horses for decades, a lot of people don't really understand how they function as a species, how they think, what their actual needs are, because we're taught that their needs and like what makes them happy is different. And we're also taught that a lot of the ways in which people care for horses and their day-to-day lifestyles are normal, and then the stress behaviors that result from those things, we're taught that those are normal behaviors and they're just personality quirks. So it's a really complex issue to work through, and it's really uncomfortable on all sides, because like once you get through the discomfort of like accepting all of the truths and realizing how much you were taught incorrectly about horses, once you're through that stage, then the new discomfort that you encounter is just realizing how ingrained and prevalent all of these issues are in the horse world, and having to see them everywhere and having that contribute to your stress. Like for me, going to horse shows or going to different boarding barns where they don't have as good of a setup for horses' needs, that's something that is way harder for me now than it was in years past, because I can't enjoy it in the same way, because I just see the degree of stress and mistreatment. And another really hard thing is just having clients and friends who really, really love their horses and who want to do the best for them, but who are running into issues that are related to their management of horses or the training, or who are using painful equipment, and having to navigate that, because it's next to impossible to tell people the truth about those things without hurting their feelings, even if they ask you. And if they do ask you and they come to you for advice, there's a good chance that they'll take it or leave it, because there could be a trainer that comes along that promises them a quicker fix and says that like I'm full of shit, even if my perspective is a more researched one that has more of a factual basis behind it. And then that's really hard too, because you develop relationships with these horses who you want to help, and then ultimately you're helpless to help them unless the people in charge of their care are actually directly participating. So it's a really difficult issue. And honestly, like, this is kind of a sad podcast, because like it's not going to be inspirational from the standpoint of being like, oh yeah, like when you get through all of this inner work, like you're going to be fine and stuff's going to get like way easier and like better, and you're not going to encounter any discomfort, because that's not the case. You just find newer forms of discomfort. What I will say is like I've gotten more resilient and better able to emotionally regulate well, which has made me a more patient and better trainer. And it's also made it easier to deal with people who I don't see eye to eye with, but it's still very, very hard. And it's still really frustrating, especially like the degree to which people will defend really harsh training or even like gloat about it. The amount of people online who will publicly and openly just like brag about hitting their horses and being really rough on them is really disturbing. And it's hard to see, because like, it's not even to say that those people don't love their horses. Like, it's just this really weird, toxic, skewed type of relationship where they're using language that they've had drilled into their head as cool and acceptable from a very young age, and having all their role models around them do the same thing. So that's really hard to cope with, and it can be really hard to just see all of these things that are normalized in the industry and not have it get to you. I do experience a lot of compassion fatigue and burnout because of it, which is why I've had to kind of try to set parameters and boundaries pertaining to like what I consume online and like how much I participate in things, and like not looking at my messages or emails or notifications after certain times of night and whatnot, because it is really hard. But like I would say where I'm at now emotionally with my ability to self-regulate and think things through and just not have stuff get to me to the degree it used to, it has gotten better. But like as you continue down this journey of like self-growth and improvement, like there's always new challenges that are going to arise. They're just going to be different from ones that you encountered before. So it's a never-ending journey, honestly. And like it's a struggle. Like I go through phases where I feel really good about things, where I can be really positive, and then through phases where I feel really, really sad and bad about things. Like I did a video recently on YouTube. If anyone wants to listen to that, it's kind of a really short paraphrased version of some of this podcast, where I was talking about how like I was feeling down about like still being so far away from some of my long-term goals, like getting a farm, and feeling really sad about that, how far off it is and how it doesn't feel like it's within like a reasonable reach yet, even though I don't intend to stop trying. But then I thought about like what my younger self would think about where I am now, like what the child version of me would think of where I am now. And like she would have been absolutely thrilled, because I now have a lot of stuff that I'd wanted for a very long time. And now that I have it and it's real, like I don't remember to the same extent like the level of yearning and like just sheer desire I had to have these things, and how badly I wanted them, and how I felt sad during those times about not having those things yet, and how I'd feel down about it. I don't remember that because years have passed since then, but that's what it used to be like. And now I have those things. So I'm trying to get better at like appreciating where I am now and appreciating how far I've come, because like realistically, even when I do accomplish a lot of these long-term goals, like there's gonna be new ones that follow that. So if I can't find ways to feel content and happy with where I am currently, no matter how many goals I achieve, it's not going to be enough because there's just going to be new things that arise. So I've been trying to just look at like, what would little me think of where I am today? Would she be proud? Do I have a lot of things now that I didn't have before? Like, how am I doing overall? Like, am I getting closer to my goals? And I would say I am, even if some of them are occurring slower than possible, than I would like, I mean, and like, even if there's challenges that still arise, and even if there's stressors that still arise, like, there's a lot of good things still going on. And it's just about not letting the stressors that do arise get to me to the same extent that they might have used to, and not catastrophizing as much, which for like anyone who's gone through a lot of trauma, hard thing to do, because as somebody who has been through a lot of trauma, like I not like is the wrong word. I often think about like how like the worst case scenario so that I can prepare for it and try to plan my way out of it, but it never actually helps. It just like adds stress for something that oftentimes never even happens. So I've been trying to move away from doing that and just maintain a more positive outlook. And I've also been listening to like a lot of like spirituality stuff and like manifestation stuff, and finding support groups and just like hanging out with friends and doing like healthier mindset stuff like that in my process of building what I want. And just like believing that it's going to happen, like that it's not here yet, that it's in the future, but like that the future is already there. And I just need to get to the point where I could reach out and grasp it. And that's kind of what I've been trying to do to motivate myself, because like there has been a lot of challenges, and it's been a long journey of like just completely having to like commit to like the process and hope for the best. Because I mean, I used to think I would never live on a farm, and now I am. And now like my struggle is that like now that I live on a farm, I'm like, I really wish I had my own farm, because I'm starting to learn all of the unique struggles that there are when you're renting someone else's property. And there's all these really expensive fixes that would give the horses a better life and like have better drainage and have just a better setup and easier setup for me. But it's tens of thousands of dollars to do, and it's stuff that you can't just take with you when you move. So like, it's finding that happy medium between what makes the most sense to do for their well-being now, and like what I should do to like save for the future and stuff, and just like accepting where I am now, because I'm not going to have a property right now. And the alternative of like boarding my horses at a facility is not something I want, because they'd get a huge hit to their care practices, and they wouldn't have as good of care, because most of the facilities locally don't offer group turnout, or if they do, it's not year-round group turnout, or if they do, it's not like as large a turnout as my horses have now. So they have a good situation, even if it's not perfect, and I'm doing my best, and I'm working towards being able to eventually get my own place and just like have a forever home that I could really like put my own stamp on and really build to be exactly what I want. And in the process of getting there, I can just continue brainstorming and imagining exactly what I would want, and then gradually, hopefully, pick away and get there. And I mean, like, everyone who listens to these podcasts or like supports my store or shares any of my stuff or likes any of my posts or supports me in any way is gonna be like integral to like me getting to those end goals, because like I can't do it without you guys. Like this everything I've built has been because of like other people believing in me and supporting me, and I'm really appreciative of that. And I intend to continue pushing on, because like I think that for my future goals, like in terms of finding a sanctuary, a stable place for myself, like owning property is like a must for me, because like I don't want to be somewhere where it can be taken away from me. Like I want something that's my own. I've had a lot of stuff taken away from me over the years, and like my family has gotten scammed by other family members. We've had like a lot of struggles. So that stability is something that I really want to feel safe. And also for doing the greatest amount of good in terms of like helping more horses and being able to do more training content and help more people, like having my own place that's set up better to train, because right now I don't have an arena, which has been super limiting. And that's also one of my major frustrations right now. But having a place where I could do that in the future, where I could take on complex behavioral cases, and where I could like link horse rehab with human like mental health treatments and stuff. I think that'd be a really beautiful goal. And it's something that I really, really want. And that I think I could do right by and that I could do a good job with and that I could help lots of horses and people. So that's really where I want to get. And I'm going to try to find a path there, even if I have to reroute a bunch of times or hike through really difficult brush. I'm going to get there. That's the goal. So I'm just going to keep on believing in myself, even if it's difficult, and just try to maintain a positive attitude and continue working on myself and my perspective on things, because this whole time, like, I've been learning as I go. And like, that's the other thing too. For like anyone who's found my content and like hated it over the years, like, I've been learning and growing out in the public eye in a way that like a lot of people can't really fathom unless they've chosen to put themselves out there on social media, which like it is a choice. This isn't to me to being like, oh, woe is me, feel bad for me. It's just the reality of it. And I think that until people have that many eyes on them, looking at them like through their worst days and through their best days and through all sorts of different lenses that don't really capture who you are as a person, until people experience what that's like, they don't really fully get it. Because like there is some years where I was going through so much shit and I was just like online and like, I know that the way I replied to people was like, it was not highlighting myself in the best light, or like the way I went about saying things, like it would just start drama and it was just like unnecessary and stuff. But at the same time, like I was coping with stuff that a lot of people don't have to go through and that I was going through for the first time. So I did not know how to do that in the healthiest way because I was still learning. And like with a lot of stuff too, now there's going to be stuff that I say now that I've done now that I'm going to look back on with a more critical eye as I learn more, because that's the nature of life. And if you're learning and growing, you will perpetually be able to do that because you're becoming a different person and you're learning more and you're making changes accordingly. So that's the nature of self-growth, and it's nothing to be ashamed of, because we have this mindset where it's like, oh, people are, oh, well, you used to think this, that's so hypocritical, like you're a completely different person, now you're just changing your tune because like it's cool or popular now. But it's like, no, like people learn and grow and they change their perspectives. And if it's because something's becoming more popular and accessible, then sure, that's great. It's not because they're doing whatever is popular necessarily. And even if it's the case, if it's better for the world, who cares? But like, you should be able to look back on things and be like, I regret that. I did that wrong, and change as a person. And it's a real shame that we live in a society that's so punitive, because people will be like looking at this past version of someone that they met years and years ago, and they don't even know who that person is now. They're two completely different people. And I totally understand that if someone has really wronged you, you don't need to let them back in your life in any capacity. You don't need to believe that they've changed. So that makes total sense. But at the same time, like if you are not making the choice to interact with someone with who they are in the present, judging them based off of a past experience without giving them the chance to show you if they've changed, and continuing to like let that color your view of them and trying to color other people's perception of them through that lens, not super fair. Depending on what they've done, like if it's something really bad, then yeah, like there's a lot, you need to do way more damage control to undo ways that you've hurt people when it's really severe. But I don't know, where I stand now is like there's people who have really hurt me in life, and I hope that they've changed for their own sake, because people who have hurt me have been hurting themselves. So for their own health and vitality and happiness, like I hope that they've changed, but also so that they don't hurt other people. But with that said, that doesn't mean I'm going to immediately let them into my life, because even if they showed me ways that they had changed, it would be very hard to trust that it wasn't just like manipulation. But with that said, like with online personalities and stuff, it's like, I hope that people will change for the better. And like, I could look at someone and think that it's disingenuous, but ultimately I don't know them and I don't know what's motivating them. And honestly, like I don't often care enough to look. If they're making an effort to do better, great. If they're making an effort to do better just to manipulate people to make them more money, shitty thing to do. But I'm kind of in the camp that it's like stuff catches up with you eventually. And it's like, if that's how you build your life and build your money and build your following, like that's the type of energy that you're attracting, and whatever is meant to happen will happen. So yeah. Anyways, everyone's changing. We all have old versions of ourselves that are not at all representative of who we are today. And like that's kind of the mindset I'm trying to operate with now, just to like have more acceptance and forgiveness towards people of all types, but also for my past self. So like learning to forgive myself and have less shame and mistakes that I've made and just be more gentle with myself in my growth as a person and like the work that I've put into growing, and just be aware of the fact that like, yeah, I make mistakes. I don't word everything the best way possible. Sometimes people misinterpret what I try to put out online in ways that I didn't anticipate. And it can be really hard because ultimately people are operating off of whatever mood they're in and whatever their personal outlook was in life. And they will add context that may or may not be present regardless. So I'm always learning, and I'm a human too. I'm a human who just happens to have a lot of eyes on me on social media. And that doesn't mean that I'm better at life than other people or that I'm less able to make mistakes than other people. I'm still a person. And the same goes with like celebrities and stuff too. They're still people as well who don't always have stuff together. They do have a lot of pull and power. So like when they say really ignorant things or promote hate speech and stuff, that's a problem. But like they're all still also people, and like we have this mindset like where people who are super in the public eye, like they're put on pedestals, and then when they do mess up, it's like viewed as this like really shocking, surprising thing. And it's like, no, they're still just people. Like we're all just people. We all make mistakes. We all have skeletons in our closet. We all have stuff that we regret. We all have stuff that we've done that we are ashamed of. We all have bad days where we respond to things in ways that we typically wouldn't, that aren't representative of who we usually are as a person, but are representative of how overwhelmed or upset we are in those moments. And it's just a very human thing. So that's kind of the place I'm trying to operate from, because it also makes it easier to deal with it when people are really unkind to me. It makes it easier to take it less personally and just to realize that they're responding from wherever they are at currently internally. And also, honestly, studying horse behavior has been helpful for that too, because like when horses are being really aggressive and nasty and like just try to hurt me and stuff, like I've been able to look at it and go, this horse is really struggling with the lifestyle they're in. They're not having their needs met and they're really frustrated and they're lashing out at me as a result. And I've tried to start looking at people from that same perspective, no matter how frustrating they are, where it's like, you don't have to condone or justify or support their behavior. You don't even have to necessarily like not call them out on it at all. But you could look at it and go like, this person clearly has something going on, because this is not something that like a happy, emotionally regulated and balanced person would do with their behavior. And even with your own behavior, when you react in a way, you could go, okay, like I've been very overwhelmed and like that's why I'm snapping and why I'm crankier, and just like getting more curious about why you feel the way you do on any given day, because I'll have days where I have like a really short fuse or where I'm like upset and cranky and I don't always know why. So like starting to question that and like explore that more has also been helpful for learning how to emotionally regulate better, and just becoming like a person who's more aware of my feelings and like how I'm feeling internally and just like who I am as a person. It's been very useful. So anyways, this has been a long-winded podcast. I hope this wasn't too boring for people. As always, like I appreciate hearing people's comments and feedback. If you like the podcast, if you share it with your friends, that's always super appreciated. If there's any podcast ideas that you'd like to hear in the future, that's always really appreciated as well. And I'm always happy to take suggestions, because it's really helpful for helping give me inspo, because I kind of just record these whenever I have inspo, which is why I don't have set podcast recording days, because I wouldn't be able to fulfill that, because I would end up like not having motivation on the day that I'm supposed to record. So anyways, thank you everyone for listening to the Making Milestones podcast. Don't forget to check the links down below in the podcast description to check out my other pages and learn how to support me and the podcast. And as always, I hope you're all having a great day and enjoying the summer. Happy summer solstice was a few days ago. So yeah, I hope everyone's doing well, and that if you are having a hard time struggling right now, I hope you have support systems that you need. Or if you don't, like I hope you know that you have external support systems that might be far away, but people who still send you their empathy and who are with you in spirit. So anyways, thank you for listening to the podcast. This has been a little bit of an update. I'm going to try to post more regularly, but I say that every time, so that may or may not happen. So anyways, I'll see you all when I see you, and thank you again for supporting my work.